My name is Zoe. I still remember the look on my daughter Lily's face last Christmas Eve when she opened that empty box. The room fell silent as she stared at the void inside, and then my mother's cruel laughter cut through the air. My sister Ava leaned in and sneered, calling us worthless. I sat there, my hands steady in my lap, letting them think they'd won. Little did they know I'd already taken care of everything months ago. It all started with a phone call from my father, Henry. It was a Tuesday in early December, and I was at my desk, reviewing a client's trust amendment. Lily's school pickup reminder was blinking on my phone when my father's name popped up on the screen. Henry rarely called. He usually sent short, practical letters. But this time, his voice sounded weak and tired. "Come home this Christmas, sweetheart. Bring Lily," he said. I hesitated. I hadn't spent Christmas at my parents' house in 6 years. The last time, Lily was 4, and my mother had seated her at a folding table in the kitchen while Ava's kids sat at the big table with the adults. Lily didn't complain, but that was what broke my heart. My father's plea was hard to resist. He told me he was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could cure, but the kind that comes with knowing your time is running out. His heart had been weakening for 2 years, and his doctor had been talking about managing his condition and having realistic expectations. So, I booked 2 seats on a Thursday morning flight, packed Lily's warm coat and her favorite colored pencils, and drove to the airport, telling myself that one dinner wouldn't be so bad. On the way, Lily asked me to tell her the lake story again. It was about my father's green metal tackle box and how he and my brother Ethan used to fish until the water turned gold. I'd sit on the dock, keeping score. She'd heard the story 100 times, but she still loved it. Ethan died 14 years ago, 3 days before Christmas. We were both 19, just 11 months apart. He worked the evening shift at a local diner. One night, a terrible storm hit, covering the roads in black ice. He was supposed to have a ride home, but Ava, who was supposed to pick him up, bailed and went to a party instead. Ethan decided to drive himself, and his car hit a guardrail on Route 12. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. My mother never recovered from Ethan's death. She rebuilt the family around that loss, making Ava the good daughter who stayed close, got married, and had 2 kids. I, on the other hand, became the one who left, the one who was at college in another state when Ethan needed me. My mother repeated this narrative so often that it became family gospel. I was labeled as worthless, and that label eventually stuck to Lily, too. We arrived at my parents' house in the late afternoon. The house was decorated for Christmas, with snow on the lawn, lights in every window, and a huge wreath on the front door. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and old wine. My mother greeted everyone with hugs and kisses, but when she got to us, she just gave me a nod, like I was a delivery person. Lily held my hand tightly and said nothing. The living room was filled with a towering Christmas tree and a gift table that told a clear story about our place in the family. Ava's kids, Mia and Jake, had piles of presents that reached their knees. Ava's gifts were wrapped in gold, and my father's were in plaid. At the far end of the table, almost hidden behind the tree skirt, was a single box with Lily's name on it, wrapped in silver paper with a white ribbon. It looked small enough to hold a pair of socks. Above the fireplace, between a row of stockings that didn't include one for Lily, was my father's snow globe. It was a tiny cabin by a frozen lake, with flecks of white that swirled when you shook it. Lily spotted it right away and ran across the room to get a closer look. My father put down his coffee and walked over to her, his steps slow and careful. He picked up the globe, shook it gently, and held it at her eye level. "That's the one. Uncle Ethan bought it at a gas station on the way home from fishing. It cost him $3, and he was so proud of it," he said. Lily touched the glass with one finger. "Was the water really gold?" she asked. "Only in September. The rest of the year, it's green like a pickle jar," my father replied. They both laughed, and for a brief moment, the house felt like a place where people actually cared about each other. I watched from the kitchen doorway. I noticed that my father's hand was trembling as he held the globe. It was a new tremor, or maybe I just hadn't been close enough to notice before. Lily leaned into his side, and I saw a look of pain and guilt cross his face. Lily whispered something in his ear. He bent down, and she cupped her hand around his ear. I made you something, Grandpa, but you have to wait until presents, she said. He stood up and looked at me, and I shook my head. I had no idea what she'd been working on. For weeks, she'd been spreading her colored pencils and printer paper across our kitchen table every night after homework, covering it with a book whenever I walked by. It's a surprise, she'd say with a big grin. Dinner preparation was a performance in my mother's house. My mother, Margaret, didn't cook, she directed. Ava sliced vegetables as my mother pointed, and I was told to set up the extra chairs from the garage, the ones that didn't match. Lily asked if she could help, but Ava waved her off without even looking up. You can stay out of the way, sweetie, she said. I pulled Lily to the counter and gave her a stack of napkins to fold. She folded them into tiny triangles, proud of each one, but no one acknowledged her efforts. When my mother plated the appetizers, she counted out loud. 8 for the adults, 4 for Mia, 4 for Jake, she said, and then she walked away. I took 2 of my appetizers and put them on Lily's napkin without saying a word. Lily ate them quietly, sitting on a stool that was too tall for her, her legs swinging. Ava leaned against the counter and sipped her wine. Still doing the lawyer thing, Zoe? Must be lonely, dealing with all those old people's wills, she said, as if it was just a casual comment about the weather. I folded another napkin and said, It pays the bills. Barely, I'm sure, she replied. Ava's husband, Ryan, appeared in the doorway. He had broad shoulders and a tight smile, the kind of man who talked about equity in houses he hadn't paid for. He touched Ava's shoulder and asked, Did you get the paperwork from the printer? Ava shot him a look. When he saw me, he stopped and said, Right. Ava said insurance. They looked at each other like they were trying to cover up a lie. I wiped down the counter and stored the information away in my mind for later. After dinner, my father touched my elbow and nodded towards the garage. I followed him. The garage was cold and smelled like motor oil and cedar. His workbench was the same as always, with tools on pegs and a can of WD-40. On the shelf above was his green metal tackle box, with the paint chipped at the corners. Ethan had scratched his initials into the lid with a fish hook when he was 12 and got grounded for a week. My father sat on the old stool by the bench and rubbed his hands together. I could hear the wheeze in his breathing, which wasn't there the last time we spoke on the phone. I've put things in order, Zoe, he said, not looking at me, but at the tackle box. What things, Dad? I asked. The house, the lake property, medical decisions, all of it, he replied. He paused and then said, You're the only one I trust with it. I started to speak, but he held up his hand. I should have done right by you a long time ago. I sat in that chair for 14 years and let your mother build a story that wasn't true. I told myself keeping the peace was the same as doing the right thing, he said, his eyes wet. He wiped them with the back of his hand, as if he was embarrassed by his emotions.
I'm sorry, sweetheart.
It's not enough, but it's all I have, he said. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't, but I put my hand on his shoulder, and he covered it with his. For a moment, the garage felt like the most honest place in the house. We went back to the living room for coffee and dessert. My mother sat in the armchair by the fire like a queen on a throne. Ava and Ryan were on the love seat, and the kids were on the floor near the tree. Aunt Grace, my mother's younger sister and a retired nurse, sat beside me on the couch and squeezed my hand under a throw pillow. The relatives filled the room with small talk and sugar cookies. My mother waited for a lull in the conversation and then said, Henry and I have been thinking about the lake house. It's too much for us now with the upkeep and the taxes. We think it should go to someone who will actually use it. She looked at Ava. The grandkids who visit deserve a place to make memories. The emphasis on visit was not lost on anyone. Ava nodded like she'd rehearsed the gesture, and Ryan crossed one ankle over the other and smiled at the floor. Jake asked if the lake had Wi-Fi, and no one laughed. My father stared at the snow globe on the mantel and said nothing. That lake house was the last place my father had been truly happy with all 3 of his children alive. Ethan caught his first base off that dock, and I learned to swim in the clear water. And now, my mother was trying to give it to Ava in front of everyone, daring anyone to object. I didn't say a word. I told myself I'd come for one dinner, and I'd made it this far. But then, I heard Lily ask Mia what was in the little silver box on the table. Mia shrugged and said, "Probably nothing good." After dessert, Ava pulled out her phone and announced it was time for the annual grandkid photo. She arranged Mia and Jake in front of the tree, adjusted Jake's collar, and told Mia to smile without showing her braces. Then she stepped back and held up the camera. Lily stood at the edge of the group, her colored pencils in her back pocket, waiting. "Just the three of them, sweetie," Ava said, waving her off. "This is the grandkid's picture." "Lily is a grandkid," I said from the couch, my voice calm and steady. I'd spent years learning to control my tone. Ava didn't turn around. "I meant the ones who are here every weekend." "Zoe, it's a tradition," she said. "Since when?" I asked. "Since always," she replied, and then she snapped the photo. Lily walked back to me. She didn't cry. She was too old to cry in public when she was excluded. She sat on the arm of the couch, pulled her knees up, and made herself small. It was worse than crying because it meant she'd learned to expect this kind of treatment. I put my arm around her and said, "Come on, let's get some air." We went to the front porch. The snow was falling quietly, muffling all the sounds. Lily leaned against the railing and watched the snow settle. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma like us?" she asked. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "That's about Grandma, not about you or us," I said. "Then why does it feel like it's about us?" she asked. I didn't have a good answer. I held her, and the cold seeped through my sweater. Behind the front door, I could hear my mother laughing at something Ava had said. Back inside, my phone buzzed. Ava had added me to a group chat labeled Christmas Logistics. There were 3 messages: a grocery list, a time for tomorrow's brunch, and a photo of the gift table with a thumbs up emoji from my mother. I scrolled up and saw that the chat was created that morning. Below the grocery list, Ryan had written, "Don't forget the folder. It's in the printer tray." Ava had replied with a check mark. But then, Ava's second message caught my eye. She typed, "Check the other chat," and then deleted it. The preview is still visible in my notification bar because the deletion hadn't synced to my phone fast enough. The other chat was a group I wasn't in. I locked my phone and put it in my pocket. In my line of work, I knew that people who kept 2 versions of a conversation were usually hiding something. I didn't ask Ava about it. I just stored the information away. Lily was in the corner of the living room, working on her project behind a propped-up children's book. Every few minutes, she'd look up at the snow globe on the mantel and then back down at her paper. She tested a shade of blue on the back of her hand, frowned, and chose another. My mother poured another glass of wine and talked to Aunt Grace about new curtains she'd ordered. I went to the kitchen for water and heard voices in the pantry. The door was cracked, and I could hear my mother and Ava talking in low voices. "He's sentimental tonight." "That's good. Get him to sign before the gift exchange while he's still in the mood," my mother said. Ryan printed the transfer deed. "The lake property will go straight to our names. Clean title. And the power of attorney." Ryan found a template online. "Dad just needs to sign, and we can manage his accounts when he can't," Ava replied. "Good. He won't read it." "He never reads anything," my mother said. I stood there with a glass of water in my hand, feeling the floor tilt beneath my feet. I wasn't surprised. I'd suspected something like this since Ryan mentioned the paperwork. But hearing it spoken aloud, the casual way they were discussing taking control of my father's life, was a whole new level of shock. Ava came out of the pantry and jumped when she saw me. I lifted my glass and said, "Just getting water." She smiled her tight, calculating smile. "You should try the moldy wine, Zoe. It might loosen you up," she said. "I'm driving later," I replied. "Of course you are," she said, and brushed past me. I rinsed my glass, dried it, and put it back in its place. Then I walked back to the living room and sat down next to Lily, who was still absorbed in her drawing. At 8 o'clock, my mother dimmed the lights and announced it was time for the gift exchange. She'd been doing it the same way for 30 years, youngest to oldest, one at a time, with everyone watching. It was supposed to look generous, but in reality, it was a show. Ava arranged the presents on the coffee table like a department store display. Mia's pile of gifts was shiny in red and green, and Jake's was wrapped in paper with tiny reindeer. My father's plaid, wrapped box was next to a mug of decaf. And at the end of the table, slightly apart from the rest, was the silver box with a white ribbon and Lily's name on it. Lily saw the box, and her face lit up with pure joy. She didn't know what was inside. She just knew someone had put her name on something, and that was enough to make her feel like she belonged. I felt my stomach tighten. Across the room, Ryan had placed a thin folder on the side table near my father's chair, as casually as if it was a magazine. It contained the transfer deed and the fake power of attorney, everything they needed to take legal control of my father's assets on Christmas Eve. Ava caught my eye and smiled her confident smile, thinking everything was going according to her plan. My mother settled into her armchair and crossed her ankles. "Let's start," she said. The room arranged itself around the tree, the firelight, and the gifts. Lily sat on the floor in front of the silver box, her hands in her lap, and the envelope with her drawing pressed against her ribs under her sweater. I sat behind her, my hand on her shoulder, and told myself to breathe. I'd kept the truth about Ethan's death a secret for 14 years. I'd kept it through the funeral, through my mother's breakdown, and through Ava's fake sobs. Guilt and grief looked the same, and I carried that burden through college, law school, and the long years of silence between me and my family. Here's what really happened. Ethan worked the closing shift at the diner. His car was in the shop, and Ava had promised to pick him up at 11 o'clock. I was 3 states away, studying for finals, when Ethan called me at 10:40. He sounded annoyed, not scared. Ava bailed. "She went to some party and won't answer her phone," he said. I told him to wait, to call a cab or our dad. I told him not to drive because the storm was bad and the roads were dangerous. But he said he'd figure it out. He didn't want to wake our dad. And then he said those words that haunted me. "It's fine, Zoe. It's just snow." He took his car, which the shop had released early with a warning about the brakes, and drove 12 miles on Route 12 in a storm that had already closed the highway to the north. He didn't make it. Ava came home at 2 o'clock in the morning, smelling like beer, and found the ambulance lights in the driveway. She never told anyone she was supposed to pick him up, and I never told either because she was 20 and broken, and my mother was already falling apart. I thought one more truth would destroy what was left of our family. Aunt Grace found me on the back porch, while the living room was filled with the rustling of wrapping paper and small talk. She carried 2 mugs of real coffee, not the decaf my mother served everyone else. She handed me a mug and leaned against the railing. "You look like you're running calculations."